It's just 2 days before Jesus would be crucified, and the authorities are trying to find fault with him that they might hand him over to the Roman authorities. They can't directly arrest Jesus because there's such a crowd around Jesus hanging on every word, and so they attempt to discredit him by posing questions to him. They challenged his authority. They had challenged whether it's lawful before God to pay taxes to Caesar. Of course, God has established the political systems of the world, and we have obligations to them which are obligations to God, to pay our taxes, to give honour to those men that God has appointed over us. Jesus indeed respected those men in their position, though their actions were not righteous, and he is our example. There were various political parties. The Pharisees represented the political right. The Sadducees represented the political left. The chief priests were of the Sadducees party, and they come to challenge Jesus, for everyone is united against Jesus. Luke chapter 20, verse 27. Then some of the Sadducees, who deny that there is a resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife, and he dies without children, his brother should take his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and died without children. And the second took her as wife, and he died childless. Then the third took her, and in like manner the 7 also. And they left no children, and he died. Last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife does she become? For all 7 had her as wife. Jesus answered and said to them, The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are counted worthy to attain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, nor can they die any more, for they are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But even Moses showed in the burning bush that the dead are raised, when he called the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. For he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. Then some of the scribes answered and said, Teacher, you have spoken well. But after that they dared not question him any more. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we think together about this lesson from Jesus. There are, of course, many people who are skeptical about life after death, for we don't routinely see people coming back from the dead and telling us what is there. A fellow I went to university with said that one of his friends had died and been revived, and reported that there was nothing there. Of course, the fact that he came back implies that he continued to exist in death. So there is something after death. Though he didn't experience everything that we might experience after death, the fact that he continued to be the person that he was before, even after he had technically died, implies that the spirit lives even when the body is dead. This was a major debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees sought to justify their position by claiming that they would follow the books of Moses but rejecting the later prophets, saying that the later prophets have misled the people, whereas the Pharisees would use the later prophets as well as Moses. The remarkable thing about the scriptures is that there is an incredible consistency between what Moses wrote, what the later prophets wrote, and the New Testament, recognizing, of course, that the New Testament was written for people living in many cultures of the world, whereas what Moses sought to establish was a godly society and culture in one place. But that has failed, and when men have tried to duplicate that, by setting up a utopian society of love and peace without war, it always fails. Not because the ideal is wrong, but because man is weak. But the question here is, if there is a resurrection, whose wife will she be? The interesting custom that we find that goes back to the patriarchs was that if a man dies without children, but he's married, then his brother must take his wife and raise up children who will be heirs to the brother who's died. We see Judah following that custom with his sons, two of whom married the same woman but died childless. This custom also underpins the story of Ruth. She marries Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, to maintain the name of her father-in-law Ahimelech. The Sadducees have an account where there were 7 such brothers. They each married the same woman and died without children, and eventually she died. Their problem was, if a woman belongs to one man, in the resurrection, which man will she have? What will happen to the other men who miss out? Whose wife does she become? Because she's been the wife of all of them. The Sadducees' question betrays a wrong understanding of the position of women. While in this world, the scriptures clearly teach a woman is to be subject to her own husband, it does not teach a general inferiority of women to men, or that women belong to men. But both those ideas are implicit in the Sadducees' question. So Jesus clarifies several issues here. Marriage belongs to this world. It is not part of the eternal. It's part of establishing a structure to operate within this world, that we have families, that children are raised in a nurturing and caring environment. It is in fact the first institution that God created for this world, and it's extremely important that we support marriage and that we support families. But those who are counted worthy of that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. The relationships between people will not focus around marriage, and people will not die anymore. But we said they'll be like the angels, equally angels, and are sons of God. The angels were called sons of God in Genesis, and we become sons of God in the resurrection. In fact, not only do angels not marry, it is wrong for them to marry. For we read that before the flood, some angels left their status in heaven to marry women, and they were judged for it. But the second point that he makes is that even Moses recognizes that there is life after death, and Jesus is saying actually that there is resurrection. For when Moses came to the burning bush, hundreds of years after Abraham, Isaac and Jacob had died, the Lord says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So these 3 men were still worshipping God. They were still alive. They were not alive on earth. Their body was dead, but they had a real relationship with God, because God cannot be their God now if they no longer exist. So many would say when we die, that's it, that's the finish. But the gospel says no, that's just the beginning of the next phase. And in the next phase, some will be granted to live in God's eternal kingdom, and those who spurn God in this present time will be not accepted into the kingdom and will be cast outside. Jesus had answered the Sadducees also, without contradicting himself and without discrediting himself to the crowds. After that, they dared not question him any more.